my next question is, how does one slaughter an animal?
Alhamdulillah. So when we look to carry out what's known as the dhabiha, there are different types of slaughter. So the dhabiha is a general word used for all animal slaughter, but nahar is a type of slaughter done specifically for camels. Right? Akar is for other types of cattle,
Right.
and zabah or dhaki is done for fowl or for birds. Right. The key for this is if you're slaughtering one of the cattle, that the animal should be taken away from the other cattle and removed from that location. Then if it hasn't been fed and watered, it should be fed and watered. Then after this, the animal should be laid on its side. And then you only reveal the knife or the sharp implement used to cut at the time, exactly at the time you're going to slaughter it. So you don't taunt the animal with it. You don't throw it at the animal. You only reveal it at the exact time of slaughtering. So when that is done, the windpipe, trachea, carotid arteries on both sides, those are cut. The animal, because of the sudden sharp blood loss, passes out and does not regain consciousness. It is quick, it is painless, and it is the easiest way to get the blood out. Now, some people after that initial moment where that happens, they might hang the animal upside down. And this might aid because using gravity to force the rest of the blood out. They might massage the meat, or they might add salt to the meat. So some of the children of Israel, they add salt to the meat because it forces it out. So they add salt, forces the rest of the blood out, then they hose it down to get the salt off of it so it doesn't stay in the meat, because high salt concentration can be a problem for your diet. This is permitted. This is permitted to make sure, because the meat, once it is done and all broken down, it should be pink or almost gray. It should not be a reddy color, a reddish deep red color, because this means the presence of blood is still there.
Yes.
So it should be a pink or pink grayish color. That should be the color of it. For fowl, like chicken and the like, they're slaughtered around the neck area, which is near where their windpipe would be. They're slaughtered around that area. And the same thing will happen to them. They should be taken to an area where they're not taunted or put in front of animals. For the camel, for the nahar on the camel, they're usually slaughtered standing up because it's simply the size of the animal and such. And you'll usually have them in one pin. So the animal's by itself in a pin. You might have to slaughter it standing up. In which case the animal then, when it's slaughtered standing up, it loses its footing and goes down. Right? So these are the ways of slaughter that should be done. The animal should be taunted. There's an incident in Imam Suyuti's collection where a Muslim man, grabbed one of the cattle, threw it down on its side and had its foot resting on its belly and was sharpening the knife over it while preparing to slaughter it. And the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam grabbed the man and took him away and said, "Are you trying to kill it twice?"
Allahu Akbar.
Meaning this is not what should be done when slaughtering an animal. Right? This should not be done. So we have to exercise certain adab and certain akhlaq. Now, the question that comes out of that, or the comment that comes out of that, is someone says, well, if you adopt this attitude, Brother Jaffer, you might be able to do this for fowl in the case of chicken and turkey and other animals, because the way that fowl can be, because they're so small, you might be able to do this for fowl, but this is not possible for big cattle. So you would really almost half the production of the cattle industry. The answer to this question is this is correct. This is probably correct, because the mass meat industry, you would probably half its production, because the point is not the target of how much meat you're slaughtering. The point is slaughtering it correctly.
Wow.
That's the point. Imam Abdullah Al-Khulaifi, rahimahullah, who died 319, the great Palestinian sage and alim, he, in his Hashya on Dalil al-Talib, he discussed the rise of mass production of meat and crops and the dangers inherent in that and what could happen if that, and that's one of the side effects he mentioned, if that happens. So this is indeed a real situation. And as Muslims, we have to think about that with regards to the cattle. The fowl is not so much of an issue because one chicken is so small, you can take it behind a curtain or somewhere, and you can do that once, and then you put it inside of a container. Because normally when you slaughter a chicken, you'll have what they call the slaughter bed, which looks like just a long sink. So you'll slaughter it, right? Then when you've slaughtered that chicken, there'll be an area. Sometimes in the US they call it the peephole, which is where the animal that's bleeding, the chicken or the fowl, you turn it upside down, and so the feet are pointed up, and it's bleeding down while it's draining. So while that's happening, you can bring another chicken in that won't see because it's in the peephole. You can't see; it doesn't know anything, right? You've washed out the slaughter bed, so it doesn't know anything. So you slaughter that one, you put another peephole. So you might have 5 or 6 chickens in a peephole, and you'll be able to do that without any issue, right? And you can do that. Maybe you can do, if you're one person, you can do. If you're really taking your time, but also being deliberate with your actions, maybe you can slaughter 20 chickens an hour, 30 chickens, 35 chickens, right? Now, when you start talking about cattle, well, that's different because now you've got cattle that, let's say you bring in cows that are hanging upside down, and you're then slaughtering them as each one goes by, saying Bismillah, wallahu, Akbar, slaughtering them. If you're doing that, yes, that's the animal. It won't be mate. It's halal, but that's not the best way to have them hung up all in front of each other upside down. Really not the best way, right? If you grab one and you pulled it up to where it was upside down and you slaughtered Bismillah, wallahu, yeah, that's fine as well, right? Hanging it upside down is not necessary, but it is useful for using gravity in draining blood.
Yes,
that's perfectly useful. Right. Now, in a word about that, then a question that may arise in people's mind that I think is important to address is someone will say, what about aquatic life, such as fish and all these other ones? Because we've spoken about land animals, but aquatic life, the exclusion of Ahmed is that all aquatic life is halal, and that its slaughtering is it's death in the water or being taken out of the water, right? That's its slaughtering. So it doesn't have the same ahkam and rules. So the salmon that's been pulled out, or the rainbow trout, or lingcod, black cod, true cod, any of these that have been pulled out, your aquatic life like this, it's not necessary that they have to be laid down or anything like that. The slaughtering is is the water and such. So that's not an issue.
Then does that mean that if the seafood is caught by a kafir, then this still remains halal to meat?
This is correct. This is correct. So that is its slaughtering, because al-ma'u tahur, the water is tahur, and its slaughtering is ma'u. And this is one of the first ahadith in Bulugh al-Maram, as well as Umdat al-Ahkam by Imam Abdul Walid Al-Ansari. So this is in Bukhari and Muslim. So there's no argument with this, right? Now, there is an issue with those that make a distinction between fins and scales, because there's some scholars that will say that if it has fins and scales, you can't eat that aquatic life. But because we're talking about the rulings of the school of Imam Ahmed and Imam Malik as well, their understanding is general. And the general understanding is, in general, all aquatic life, unless exceptions have been listed, like the frog has been listed as an exception. The alligator and the crocodile are exceptions to this rule, right? So these are exceptions to the rule. But in general, all aquatic life, unless exempted, is permitted for consumption, whether it's the killer whale, the orca, the shark, the blue whale, shrimp, prawns, jumbo prawns, king prawns, clams, oysters, all whatever is a bottom feeder, the crab, the lobster, all these things are fit for consumption. Starfish, seahorse, praying mantis, whatever is crawling in the ocean is fit for consumption if it has not been exempted, like in the case of the frog, the crocodile, the alligator,
Yes.
The snake, right? These types of things, right?
And what do we have a ruling which says something about animals which live partially on land and also in water?
Yes, that's the reason for the issue with the frog and the alligator and the crocodile, because they're living two lives. They come out of the water, they go in. They come out of the water, they go in, right? And even that being the case, for the time that it's on land, what's it looking like? Well, when it's on land, the alligator and the crocodile, they've got fangs. The snake has fangs. The bullfrog, it doesn't, and it doesn't have those. Yes, but it's not living its life in the water. It's on water and land, and it's been mentioned as Rasulullah as being khabith. So therefore, the ruling extends to that, as per the hadith in Suyuti's collection.
And this particular animal called a hippo, it does not really live underwater, but it tends to be underwater as well.
Has fangs. So it spends a big part of the day in water, but it comes on land, it's got fangs. Even though it's because someone could say, well, what about the elephant? Those tusks are fangs.
Right.
The dentition, where it is, the dentition of the animal, which is the location of the teeth, where the tusks are where the fangs grow out of, and those are massive fangs. Right. So what those are, it's impermissible to eat it. It's because it's got nothing to do with that. That's why I said in the beginning, it's not necessarily anything to do with what it eats. Because if we take that logic, then we'd have to say, well, therefore the elephant must be halal. But it's not, it's haram. But the elephant's a vegetarian, it's an herbivore. Yes, it is. So is the hippopotamus. Yes, it is. But it's got fangs, so we don't eat it. Not every animal that has fangs is necessarily a carnivore. The Tyrannosaurus Rex, the skeletons that they found of it, when they've examined the teeth, they can only find cellulose fibers, which means all it ate was green. Wow. Didn't eat people. Don't let Jurassic Park the film fool you. The Tyrannosaurus, all it ate was all we've got evidence of, because every single Tyrannosaurus, every single example of Tyrannosaurus remains that we found, when it's had dentition, which is a full set of teeth that can be examined, when they've checked the teeth, the only traces they found have been cellulose traces. There's been no traces of any protein of any kind, which means it was chomping on, spinach or lettuce or whatever it ate. Just like the woolly mammoth. Every time they find a woolly mammoth, there was about 12 years ago, they found an entire plain of woolly mammoths, fossilized woolly mammoths that had been destroyed in a volcanic eruption. Because the eruption happened so quickly, their legs were broken in the course of the eruption. And so they were killed all at once. And every single one of the several hundred of them that they found has cellulose in the stomach, cellulose in the mouth. There was even, some of them were defecating during that time, they had cellulose in the feces. So it's obvious they're not meat eaters, even though they got massive tusks. But what are those for? For fighting, I suppose.
It's like when you look at the giraffe, that doesn't have fangs, so we presume that it is permissible since it doesn't have it.
Yes. Although you'd probably have to use nahr in order to slaughter it. Right. Because there really wouldn't be an easy way to bring it down.
Exactly.
In the same way as other cattle, to bring it down to where it was in a sitting position, to where you'd probably have to do nahr to slaughter it. I've never seen one slaughtered, so I'm not sure how. Sure. But I've seen them hunted, though. There have been cases where people have hunted with crossbow or bow and arrow. People have killed them in sub-Saharan Africa, so I've seen that. But I'm not sure if someone was to forego that and say we're just going to domesticate one and bring it down and slaughter it, I'm not sure how that would be done.
Yes. Since that we're talking about this subject now, there's one issue that I just wanted to ask you about. Someone asked me this question. The Hanafis, they have a strict ruling with consuming seafood. Now, can a Hanafi, can he adopt the madhab of the Hanabila in this case?
Yes, for the Hanafis who insist that they must have fins and scales, and the reason for that ruling about fins and scales is the Hanafis have many usul, 21. Now, and the qawaid are quite plentiful as well. One of the usul is shart min qablina. Shart min qablina. What was in the laws before us? If something has not been explicitly mentioned in the book and sunnah or ijma of having been abrogated in the laws before, for the Hanafis, it is still held to be in effect. It's not abrogated unless it's been clearly stated as such to be so. So the law about fins and scales is from the shart of Nabiyuna Musa alayhi salam. Now, the children, that ruling, the Hanafis also cite some incidents of some Sahaba where they were fishermen, and sometimes the Sahaba, they caught certain fish, and those fish were lacking fins and scales, and they threw them back. So some of the Sahaba that did that, the Hanafi scholars opine, rahimahumullah, that they threw them back because there must be some pre-existing set of principles that's still in place that made them do that. Because otherwise they wouldn't just throw it back, because it was more than one instance, it's more than one of them, and they threw the same things back. The things they kept throwing back were fish that did not have, or animals, aquatic life that did not have the fins and scales. There's never an incident where they threw back a trout or threw back. It was always a case where it didn't have fins and scales, was thrown back. So that to them makes them say that means that law is still current, it's still extant. So they use the principle of shart min qablina. Yeah.
So this leads them basically to prohibiting all seafood except the fish with fins and
scales.
Fins and scales.
That's correct. So that would mean any animals that crawl along the sea floor are out of the question, which includes oysters, crabs, lobsters, right? And any fish that don't have both fins and scales are out of the question. So that might disqualify maybe certain types of cod, right? So that might disqualify those animals. It might disqualify the turbot. It might disqualify certain breeds of turbot, because some turbot are lacking some of the things that the Hanafi scholars would insist on. So that means turbot would be out of the question, which would mean because both whiting and turbot are used in a lot of, when you go to certain fast food restaurants and you order a fish, fillet of fish or a fish sandwich, there's two types of fish that they tend to use to make those fish fillets. One is turbot and another one's whiting. And sometimes they mix both of them together, but usually it'll just be one. So those fish, the turbot, based upon the fact that it might not have both criterion, it might not be permitted for Hanafis to have the fillet of fish or those types of things. Right? So that means then that shrimp or prawns are off the menu, that all the bottom feeding fish are off the menu, the seahorse, the starfish, the crab, the lobster, the praying mantis, all these types of things, the shark, the swordfish, right? They might be off the table, based upon that understanding.
And this is the dependent upon position in their madhab?
That I don't know. Now that's a good question. I don't know. I've met enough of them to where they've made that statement that would make me think that if it's not the dependent upon, it's at least a zahir. It's at least like one of the dominant rulings.
Yes.
Because every time I've met them, it's tended to be that same statement has been made.
Indeed.
So it leads me to believe that if it's not more timid, it's at least a zahir, where it's like a strong qawl. It's like a strong qawl.
So we can say that they can adopt the opinion of the Hanbali madhab.
Yes, this is correct, because this is to do with transactions. Eating, drinking, buying, selling, renting, that all falls under mu'amalat.
MashaAllah. Okay, excellent. Now before continuing, there was just one more issue that I wanted to ask about slaughtering. Now, what is the ruling actually on stunned meat and animal that is put to sleep before slaughtering?
Okay. Alhamdulillah. Now, stunned meat, If the animal is immobilized, so it's not been knocked unconscious, but it's been immobilized. There is some khilaf about this because the animal is still capable of being slaughtered while in a conscious state, although it's just been immobilized. So some would say it is permitted if the animal's not lost consciousness and it's just been merely immobilized to make it possible to slaughter it without struggle. If you're talking about stunning it to where the animal's also lost consciousness,
right? Yes.
Okay. The ruling on this, there's a minority ruling that is quoted that I cited on the Jurjis blog by Imam Abdul Ghani Al-Lubadi, where he leans towards the position that it could be permitted in that instance where like the Bismillah has not been uttered over it or something like that happens, right? These unique cases. So in a rarer opinion, it would be permitted by the qawl of Abdul Ghani Ibn Yasin Al-Lubadi rahimahullah, died 1390. But the dominant statement is that it's not.
So any animal that has been stunned, and lost its consciousness or has been sedated, this we should not be.
Yes, because it will be classed as meta. Yeah, we class as meta,
right?
Which is meat found dead.
As the blood wouldn't properly flow as it was conscious.
That's correct, because what happens, Imam Jawzi rahimahullah says, in circumstances like this and others, it congeals. So you won't be able, and that congealing process doesn't allow you, because it becomes almost like jelly. So it won't free flow when you're trying to drain the animal's blood. It won't all come out.
Well, now this could be very.
That's where it becomes a problem, and that's why, and that's an issue. That's why when I go to supermarkets, whenever I go to Kafir supermarkets, I would go and I can just look at the meat and tell, that one you can tell, because the blood is still in the meat. A lot of times, like there's these big red patches. I mean, this happened to me when I was on the west coast of the U.S. When I was in university in Oregon, I was almost semi-vegetarian unless I could take a drive and go up to the local kosher butcher of the Jews. And, it's permitted to consume that based upon Al-Ma'idah, the 5th Surah, ayat 4-6 that we cited. If I couldn't head up to the local Orthodox Jewish butcher, I wouldn't eat from the Muslims, because every time I came into their place of business, I would look at the meat and I just put my thumb against it and blood would ooze out. I was like, nah, I can't eat this. And it's so strange that we have the same stringent guidelines on slaughtering, but so many Muslims take it light.
Yes.
Right. So and I know this because there was a point where I worked at a farm as well, Shielder Dairy. And I took a run with some Orthodox Jews, big beards, big black hats, the peot. So I took a run with them for a number of months just to follow along and shadow them to see what they do. It's like, yeah, this is all the same stuff that we do. But their attention to detail and their precision and their sharpening the knives and all these other things are things that in Dar al-Kufr, I can say, in Dar al-Kufr in the US, so many Muslims are sloppy about it. So when I was in Oregon, I was either like semi-vegetarian, I'd have eggs or whatever else, but I didn't have any beef or anything like that, because I could not eat from the Muslims because their meat was meta.
Wow.
I just couldn't. I had to go to the Jews. I had to take a drive. Alhamdulillah, I had a car. I drive up like once a month and just order that and do whatever else. And it's the same thing I found since coming to the UK. Most of them are very sloppy. So there's only 2 places that I eat meat from. When it comes to like buying meat, there's only 2 places I'll buy meat from. I won't buy meat from anywhere else. Because of the fact that I can see that when I press the meat or when I hold it and grip, there's still blood oozing from the meat. And that's the proof that it's meta. It wasn't slaughtered correctly, or it wasn't drained correctly, or it died a death that made it meta, or it was choked or beaten or stabbed or died from a fall or eaten by another animal, whatever those guidelines were mentioned at the ayat that we quoted at the top of the top of our gathering. it possessed all of those things. And based upon that, I said, okay, I can't consume this. And I've had to be like this, because this isn't like eating fish where those stringencies aren't there. Fowl is a bit easier to slaughter, but people, there'll still be some Muslims that will not be diligent about fowl. Fowl is easier to slaughter than cattle, because cattle tend to squirm when they're so big and getting them down.
Yeah.
But fowl, to grab the chicken by the neck, or to grab it by its body and then cradle your arm under the neck, that's easier because it's a smaller animal.
Right.
So how do you still wind up making this animal meta? How? This is the part that confuses me, because the children of Israel have been told that they have to do it, and they won't. They refuse to stun. They refuse to do. They won't do it. They stubborn. We're not doing it. And they've taken people to court. They've done everything else. So if I don't eat in the area that I live in currently, if I can't go to those two places, if they're closed, like during the time where there was the big 20-month shutdown, there was a point where I and a couple of Muslim brothers were going to start ordering food from the Orthodox Jews living around our area. Like we put in like money for like a bulk order of like a lamb, or a bulk order of, buffalo, or a bulk order of camel. And we were just going to do that because that's the situation that we found.
And so it is permissible to eat meat slaughtered by Jews?
Yes, because based upon ayat 46, particularly the 6th ayah of Al-Ma'idah, because it's mentioned their food is permitted for them. The condition is that nothing is that these people are adhering to what's left of their Torah. Number 2, that nothing's mentioned where they associate partners with Allah at the time of slaughtering, and that they adhere to all our same principles. And that's the children of Israel are adhering to all those, the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox. Right. I wouldn't eat meat from conservative or Reformed Jews, because they say that some of the Torah is negotiable. So they don't believe in all of it.
Right, yeah.
So I would only eat from the Orthodox, which in this case were the Black Hat, the Lubavitch, Satmar, all these other types of groups. I would only eat from them. Now, when you start talking about Orthodox Christians, the people of, firstly, the people in the US and the UK, the Western world, that say, like the Protestants, that say they're Ahlul Kitab, they're not Ahlul Kitab, because the rest of the church holds them to be apostates. And the condition that Imam Wafiquddin al-Qudama rahimahullah and other ulama mention is that the condition of being Ahlul Kitab is that, firstly, that you acknowledge the remains of your kitab that's been sent down. Number 2, you're generally acknowledged by the body of your people as being such. And the Protestants are not, because none of the wider churches see them as Ahlul Kitab or as wider Christians, so they are not Ahlul Kitab. So it wouldn't be permitted to consume that from the Christians. But from the Orthodox Christians, where we're talking about the Latin Rite, so this is the Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, or the Greek Orthodox. If you find that there are some of them that are slaughtering meat and they're not uttering the Trinity or other kufri things, yeah, you can consume that. But you have to be more diligent checking them than you do have with Jews, because what they do and what they say is there's things that they're doing that are more difficult to separate, right? So you have to be more diligent. But if you can find Copts or the Tawhedo Church, where they don't mention the Trinity when slaughtering, and they just slaughter it the same way we slaughter. So a lot of the Copts of Egypt do that same thing. So yes, it will be permitted to consume. The Aramean Church of Syria would be permitted to eat that. The Malabarian Christians of the southern tip of India, which have been around for 1700 years, the way they slaughter meat, this is permitted. But in the West, you don't have any, what we're calling the West, there are no Ahlul Kitab among the Christians. They're not Ahlul Kitab because their own churches have said they're apostates. In fact, when Tony Blair and George Bush and a delegate of American rulers went to visit the Church of Bethlehem and as well as the Holy Sepulchre, they were denied entry by the church leadership because they said, you're not Christians. So they're not Christians. So we can't eat off them.
Right. In the general sense, because at the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, these people, the Christians and the Jews at that time, they were Orthodox, right?
Yes, there was no Protestant.
Right, yeah.
The only thing there was is you were either from the Eastern churches or the Western churches. That's it.
Sure, yes.
Protestantism didn't exist. And so to understand what happened with Protestantism, you have to go back, and there's two things you should do. Is you should study the Protestant Reformation, which is there's a series of lectures online about the Protestant Reformation, which is like, I think it's about 11 parts, which will take you step by step through the Protestant Reformation and how they moved away from whatever core tenets were left of their religion. And you have a good picture of Martin Luther and everything else. There's a series by a man by the name of Steve Gregg called The History of the Church, which walks you through the history of the church and what happened. And you can tell, okay, these people have thrown off whatever remains of revelation they have left, and it's a lot of it's just lip service. They don't follow any of the laws regarding consumption of meat, or the laws regarding halal and haram, regarding what's in their cloven hoof, uncloven. They don't follow those laws. They've completely discarded them.
Right.
So they are not Ahlul Kitab. And then another condition of the Ahlul Kitab, if we're talking about marrying them, which is again a separate topic, is they have to be virginal, or they were married before you marry them. These women aren't virginal; they're not virgins. They don't prize that. They don't have afa. They don't have virginity and prize their virginity and follow their religion. There's people that are bringing home garden variety pagans and saying they're Ahlul Kitab. They're not.
Yeah.
This woman named Tracy is a mushrika.
They're not Orthodox.
And because she comes from a family where they say we're Christian, that doesn't mean they're Christian.
Exactly. Yeah.
So this is madness.
Oh.
So, but that's like a different time to discuss like nikah.
Yes. Just one more thing on, because we're talking about meat of the Jews being permissible now. When we slaughter, we say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. Now, is this a wajib? Because the Jews don't pronounce exactly like this as well.
They're going to say something similar in Hebrew.
Okay. So,
they're saying a benediction in Hebrew, which is similar to that, although it's longer.
Okay. And this pronouncement, if one is slaughtering, one has the intention, but if a Muslim forgets the statement, what is the rule?
If a Muslim forgets the Bismillah, wallahu Akbar, the meat is still permitted if he forgot it. Okay. If he purposely omitted it, then this would not be valid for him to purposely omit it. If he's mute and he just pointed at the sky, right, then that's sufficient, because he's pointing at the sky. That means he's mentioning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name. He points up at the sky, or he points up and then down, La ilaha Muhammad Rasulullah, Bismillah, wallahu Akbar, or similar things to that. Then that is sufficient, because it equals that, because he's verbalizing the intention in whatever way is possible for him. This is permitted.
And if one can verbalize it, that is then a condition, actually.
Yes, it should be verbalized.
And if, for example, let's say if somebody's slaughtering 10 chickens or 10 goats, should he do it each time, or can one Bismillah be sufficient here?
Okay, when you start talking about that, now we're talking about mass slaughterings. If someone said Bismillah, wallahu Akbar, because these are single unitary acts of ibadah, right? It's a single unitary act. So they're doing them one at a time, just like when you fast, one at a time.
Yes.
Now, in the event of someone's making the intention that they're going to do a series of slaughterings and saying Bismillah, wallahu Akbar, and I'm going to slaughter, this is disliked. It's disliked to do this, because these are single unitary acts of ibadah. So the utterance should be for each act of ibadah, right?
Okay, mashallah. Barakallahu fiqh. I wanted to move on to the drinks now.
Okay, before we come to drinks, I wanted to bring something up.
Oh, sure.
There was an incident where someone, when I was working in the packing industry, the meat packing industry in the US, he took me into a room, our supervisor, whose name was Randall, into a room, and he said, you guys are both Arabs. And we looked at each other and looked at him and said, yes. He said, you guys know how to write Arabic? I said, yes. He said, okay, could you write the words halal on these pallets of meat that we're sending out? Now I want you to just process that. Just let that sink in for a second. Wait a minute, what? Yes, these pallets are going to be going out. and we want to write halal on these. To which our response, being two Arabs, is, but are they halal though? He's like, well, isn't it just the case that you say something and it makes it halal? No, there's things that we don't just say, but things that have to be done. So there are some people who, over haram meat, they might say Bismillah, wallahu, Akbar, and say, well, that makes it halal now. Well, maybe for I Dream of Genie, or for similar television programs like that from the 50s and 60s, maybe. But we don't worship a genie. We worship a holy and a righteous God. That is not the case. And this has to be stressed because there were people who had been telling some Muslim brothers on the West Coast of the US that when they go to McDonald's or Burger King and order the Whopper, that they say Bismillah, wallahu, Akbar, and they just chow down. This is not correct. Because before the Whopper reached you, there's certain things that the object of whopping underwent before it reached you as a Whopper at the ending stage. So the meat to be whopped underwent certain things that Bismillah, wallahu, Akbar will not undo. So by the time the object of whopping reached you as the Whopper, it has undergone certain things. But these people are not. The people that are doing this are not considering this, especially if someone's come up in Dar al-Islam his whole life. They're thinking that, well, there's Christians here and they adhere to they must be adhering to it. That's not true. And that's why scholars have a section in, when you study usul fiqh, of fatwa sometimes changing based upon time and place and condition. Because fatwa have to be applied accurately. There's general fatwa, and then there's fatwa that have to be applied based upon time, based upon place, and based upon condition. There's general fatwa that are always applicable, but then there are some that have to undergo things because of certain circumstances that alter the ruling for that given circumstance. So I wanted to say that because people have to understand this is not something to mess with. It's not something to play with. Do not play with this stuff.